The Ned'S Declassified cast spoke out on their podcast following a ton of backlash they received after seemingly joking about the Quiet on Set docuseries that recently was released. The cast was also called out by Drake Bell on Twitter, and upon that happening, Devin Werkheiser issued an apology to him on Twitter. And now the cast has sat down for a podcast episode to explain their actions and talk about their experience on Nickelodeon and opinions after watching the docuseries. If you didn't know, the three main actors from Nickelodeon's Ned'S Declassified School Survival Guide, Devin Werkheiser, Lindsay Shaw, and Daniel Curtis Lee, started a podcast together last year. They've talked about behind-the-scenes secrets, their dating lives, and so much more. But this week, they discussed the Quiet on Set docuseries that has just come out, and they certainly had a lot they needed to say after the way they came across as extremely insensitive in this clip of them that went around last week.
Coming.
Daniel, I told you.
Daniel, we told you never to speak about that. Get back in your hole, Daniel, and give me your holes. Sorry, we shouldn't joke about this. We really shouldn't.
This is awful. Why are we doing this?
Because this is about us. Listen, our set was not like that. And no, it's awful. The Drake Bell is that's crazy to hear. That is. And that never came out, which is really wild.
People assumed they were making fun of those coming out to share their stories in the docuseries, one of which was Drake Bell, but they've since come out to say that that wasn't the case, and they see why everyone was so upset at them for what they had to say on live.
We fucked up, I get it. We hadn't seen the doc, and everyone was asking us for our opinions on it.
Oh, on the TikTok.
Yeah. And I get it. Now having seen the documentary, it's so disturbing. I get they were asking us
and we had no clue of the magnitude of what they were discussing. We're also multitasking. I'm sitting there editing the sound. I thought we had lost all of the footage.
Now we've watched it, and I get it. If I had just watched, especially that third episode, and then watched us joking like that,
you would be upset.
I would be like, are they sociopaths?
They wanted to firmly get it across that they were not talking about anyone on the live, and that Devin was making a joke at Daniel, and it had nothing to do with them trying to make light of anyone or anything, and that they had not seen the docuseries yet.
So with that, get it clear, you guys were not speaking on that. You weren't talking about.
No, we hadn't watched. I didn't know
that.
Wasn't sitting with the details at all. I know what the joke sounds like, but I was talking to Daniel.
You were talking to me while I was working. People like, Daniel, you're off camera. What was going on? I'm sitting there at the desk working on audio, super multitasking.
Yeah.
And that statement was directed to me in the extreme way that we disparage each other.
Yeah.
My constituents were just completely upset, and they wanted clear that we were not referring to that.
No, but we fucked up.
Yeah, absolutely.
I get what it looks like.
They later talked about Dan Schneider and the fact that people have always asked them about him and their thoughts or their experiences, and Devin says he's never commented on Dan because they didn't work with him. Their show was created by a man named Scott Fellows, and they actually had a good experience with him, but they said that after watching the docuseries, they did have things that they wanted to say about Dan, in that he should be held accountable for the things that happen on his sets.
Dan gets covered, not fully as a, but just as a boss and a weirdo.
I don't want to be like I'm trying to lead a witch hunt. That's what I don't want.
Yeah.
But the fact that so much of this happened on his watch.
Yeah.
There needs to be repercussions. So this and I think people are catalyzed right now.
I think so.
To make that happen.
They get into a conversation surrounding Brian Peck and the fact that prior to his arrest in 2003, he actually did work with them on their pilot episode of Ned'S Declassified. And it's horrifying to look back and think about the fact that they had worked with him on that and that he turned out to be this horrible person. Devin said that he recalled looking in the newspaper and seeing the fact that Brian was in there and remembering that they had worked together.
Pilot of Ned's, we filmed at Nick on Sunset, where all the Dan Schneider shows filmed. In the winter of 2003, and Brian Peck was Stephen Markarian, who played your original character. He was his stand-in on our pilot.
He was his stand-in.
He was on our set.
He was right there with you guys.
Yeah.
This close, man.
Yeah. And I remember seeing, however many months later, my mom reading a newspaper, and I saw his face. And I remember pointing it out to my mom going, Mom, he was on
this guy.
pilot. Like, that's how close we were, but then we steered into this other experience.
They referred to their experience working at Nickelodeon multiple times as this sort of anomaly because of the fact that they didn't have these horrible situations that others had experienced. And they said that they had someone who advocated for them to make sure that they weren't overworked and things like that. They said every set has this kind of person, but it's up to them to really do their job and advocate for the children on set. And not everyone is willing to do that, which is obviously really upsetting, and which is why people have been urging the industry to make changes to protect all children. Because unfortunately, not a lot of the parents are going to be willing to protect their own child. A lot of them are chasing fame, chasing their own dreams. We've seen it many times where child actors have come out and talked about their parents making them do this. Acting was not something that they wanted to do themselves. It was something that their parents had forced them into. And so those parents are not always going to be looking for their child's best interest on a set. And the industry needs to do better at making sure that a child will be protected no matter what in any circumstance on a set. And if that's not possible, Daniel brings up the fact that he feels like maybe children should not be in the industry. And he does seem to know that this is a controversial statement or something that people might debate him on. But since there isn't much regulation out there to ensure a child's safety, this is something that he was bringing up.
This is a hard stance. I don't know, guys, if this is a hard stance. Children almost should not be allowed to be on television. I'm sorry, dog. You gotta cut it off.
Yeah. Yep.
You gotta cut it off. It has to stop. It's a humanitarian issue. I don't think it's okay to keep allowing kids to reach this type of stardom. You know, even with social media happening now, at least maybe the parents can be there. I know it has its own issues, but it's disgusting, man.
In the end, they just really wanted to get it across that they were taking the docuseries seriously and didn't mean to come across as joking about it or Drake Bell in any way, and were constantly expressing their regret for how ignorant they were in commenting on it before watching it. Daniel even got emotional at one point while talking about Drake Bell's dad speaking in the documentary, and the fact that Brian Peck had gotten in between them and made Drake believe that his dad was holding him back in his career just to get closer to him. And Daniel was really emotional talking about this. He talks about his own dad and just how heartbreaking it was to hear someone get in between a father-son relationship, and the fact that someone did this to Drake Bell, and you could just tell that this was really hitting him. And I think this hit a lot of people hearing Drake Bell's dad talk in the docuseries about how Brian Peck got in between them and how he just wanted what was best for his son, and how he was willing to do what Drake was requesting of him, which was basically to not be his manager anymore, because he didn't want to ruin the relationship that he had with Drake any further.
I think about my dad, man. You want to do everything for your kids. I don't know his story about where he moved from. We moved farther away from Mississippi.
Yeah.
You will do anything to have been successful. My dad had to give up his own, life, brother's family, good, solid job, trying to be better and establish something for his family. There's so many times that he would sit me down and say, hey, if this ever happens to you, I'm here. I'm always going to be there one step away. I'm right here, right here, right here.
Yeah.
I'm thinking about if I ever did want to get away from my dad to try and pursue some greater position.
Yeah.
And I let those people get to me, what could have happened to me. But that bond, man, breaking somebody's bond with their father is up, man.
It's fucked up.
I think everyone who watched this doc or even just heard about the topics discussed are pretty horrified by what was in it. And these three talked about overall being just deeply regretful for being so reckless in talking about something that they hadn't seen yet. The comments seem all over the place in terms of how they felt watching this podcast episode, of them discussing their actions, with some forgiving them and others still not understanding how they could have joked in the way that they were. But that is what they had to say about everything. Let me know if you guys watched Ned'S Declassified back in the day, if you've watched these three talk about the show on their podcast, if you even knew that they had a podcast. Let me know how you feel about this whole situation as well. I love you guys so much, and I will talk to you in the next video. Bye, guys.